So hi, Pat. I'd like to thank you for joining me today to talk about housing. Before we get into it, I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that make up the Cowper electorate, the Biripi, Dunghutti and Gumbaynggirr people, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and future. We'll get straight into it and let's talk about the cost of housing. It's certainly no secret that housing prices and rents have been skyrocketing around Cowper and much of regional Australia. I'm really interested to hear from you your view of the local housing situation or stories you're hearing and the impact or potential impact that a lack of affordable housing is having on the community and potentially our workforce.
Thanks, Emma, and I'd also like to adopt your acknowledgement to country and also include the Dunghutti Nation up in the hills around Bellbrook and Macleay Valley.
Thank you.
Look, your first question has a number of components in it, and that's the impact and then the potential impacts on both workforce and community. So if I can, firstly, I acknowledge there is a housing shortage and a crisis at the moment. We are at crisis point. And there are a number of reasons for that, which I'll go into a little bit later. We have seen the impact on the workforce already. I mean, it's no longer a social or affordable housing situation. We're looking at middle income earners who cannot either find rental or afford to purchase. So I certainly acknowledge that. So what that is doing in turn is preventing people from actually moving into the area. I mean, we as the government talk about a decentralised model. For example, we move a agency from Canberra or a city-based location into Cowper. The problem would be not the workforce, but actually finding somewhere to live. Where I've heard anecdotally of doctors, nurses, police officers being unable to find a property or taking a long time to find property. So I acknowledge that lack of housing and certainly affordable housing impacts directly on the workforce. In terms of the impact on a community, there is a recent paper that's been put out by the Tax and Revenue Committee, a report called the Great Australian Dream, and it has a number of recommendations in there. But in there, in the forward, it talks about the benefits of home ownership. And it talks about reducing wealth inequality. It talks about improving mental health and better childhood outcomes and providing that stability. So to answer your question, the impact on communities that is crucial. And until we solve that problem, it's only going to get worse. But I do refer back to that report, which I do recommend everybody read, because there are recommendations in there, which I'll talk in the next question about, that will alleviate and something that I will push and I will champion for our region.
Yeah, excellent. And that does bring us to our next topic, which is the role of government in housing. So what do you see as the role of government, and you specifically if re-elected in the housing space? Is there's some local priorities or broader federal initiatives that you'd champion? And we're also asking, what's the difference between aspiration and achievable?
Yep. Well, to answer that question, what is the role of government now? What is the role of local government? What is the role of state government? What is the role of federal government? Essentially, in the past, the role of housing has been through state government and local government, ensuring that there are basically supply and demand. It's simple economics. If parcels of land are not being opened up, if there is no availability of land, of course, that is going to put pressure on the whole system, increase property prices, as we have seen over the past number of years. What an unfortunate statistic, in the past 10 years, the New South Wales government has sold off $3.5 billion of social and affordable housing. And to impact on that, they've only achieved 10% of the new target for residential dwellings. What we're not doing there is actually providing more supply. So local government, state government need to work together to undo that green tape, undo that red tape, to allow both local government and developers, private companies, to get out there and responsibly open up parcels of land that have been there for a very, very long time. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a responsibility for the federal government. There definitely is a responsibility, and that comes down to those recommendations in the report. One of those recommendations is, as you know, the government provides $5 billion through the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement to the states and territories, plus another $1.5 billion in rental assistance. That's untethered at the moment. What a recommendation is that the money goes to the states and territories with outcomes. You cannot just have this money and do with it what you will. There must be outcomes in communities, and that can be community-led, it can be local council-led, but there has to be that outcome and accountability for that money that is going out. So that on a national level, if I'm in government, that is something that I will champion very, very hard. I think it has been too flexible in the past, and we know as locals what we need rather than being told from the top end how it should work. So that's something I will certainly do. We also need to look at other options rather than opening up parcels of land, because of course there's the environmental consideration. That we have to, in our larger centres, look at going up. We have to look at alternate options such as community-based residential options. So they are things that we as the federal government have an obligation to do. Once again, the recommendations in the report are really focused on states and territories and local government being incentivised to open up housing and provide more low-cost and social housing as well.
Yeah, it certainly is a big area, isn't it? And
yep.
And moving on to another big topic is housing and climate change. We're no strangers to intense weather events in Cowper. In the last few years, we can count drought, bushfires, floods, and some pretty serious storms. We're thankful we didn't experience the level of devastation that Lismore recently did with 2 successive floods. But there are some big questions, and the role of government is one of them. So how do we deal with housing and climate change? And how do we ensure that it isn't the groups who are already vulnerable that are going to be facing the biggest impacts and risks?
Yeah. So addressing the last part of that question, how to ensure that vulnerable people aren't the ones who are most exposed? Again, that comes down to supply and demand. We need the supply out there. That is the first thing. The second thing is responsible development. Technology has come so far in the past few years, let alone 10 years. What I have seen, and I've spoken to a number of the mayors in the electorate about the planning for homes. We need that responsible environmental planning, such as solar panel uptake, how the house is built, what it's built with, recyclable material. I mean, there's a wonderful business in Port Macquarie called Blue Bins, who has taken construction and development waste from 12% recycling up to nearly 90% recycling. And that is how we look after the environment. That's how we address climate change. One startling statistic through development is planning restrictions can cost. So on the developer, planning restrictions can cost up to 2/3 of the cost of a house. Now that's just remarkable. That's just incredible to think. And I'm not crying for developers. What I'm saying is that if we can take away that red tape, that green tape on planning restrictions responsibly on developers, it will push down the cost of a house. That will help those more vulnerable people. That'll help everybody for the cost of a home. So there are so many things, and the government has responsibility. We have the solar panel rebates. We've just invested $500 million in the company over in Western Australia to work on better batteries so we can harness the sun and have a reliable power source. So look, that, to answer your question, it does come down to supply and demand. It comes down to technology, and I believe that we're actually working towards that.
Nice. And then let's move on to some housing solutions. So, I know you're familiar with our work, and the Housing Matters Action Group is very focused on unlocking innovative local solutions while also advocating for broader system change. Is there anything that you see as a key project or concept or policy that would make a big difference in the housing space that you want to mention as we finish up?
Look, I think one of the biggest things is those recommendations about incentivising Commonwealth Government, incentivising state and local governments to make those changes. That is the number one thing I can do on a federal level. Locally, and I have been involved with Housing Matters. I championed the project up in Bellingen. I've worked on the project down in Kempsey for the 26 1 and 2 bedroom units for vulnerable people or people at risk. I do that almost every day of the week. I talk to private organisations, try and work with councils and other organisations to see what's available firstly, and then work out what we can do. Because if every single member around the country did that and worked with organisations such as yours, one little bit at a time makes a big difference. So look, that's what I'll continue to do. That's what I've been doing. I think I have the runs on the board there. It won't change if I'm sitting in this seat in a few weeks' time.
Well, thanks, Pat, for your time today and your willingness to talk housing. I know we could talk much longer about any of those topics that we've covered. And all the best with the campaign. It's certainly a very busy 6 weeks for you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.